Mm. Yeah. Walls of silver, floors of glass, dancing shadows.
Chapter 4. Fragments of the Past. The morning bled into afternoon before Serena left her room. Hours had passed, measured only by the sun's slow migration across the bedroom window. She had drifted in and out of shallow sleep, hair still damp from the shower, the silk robe clinging to her arms like a second skin. She watched the gardeners through the glass, their green smocks moving among the hedges in precise, choreographed silence. It was easy to imagine the world outside continuing on some relentless loop, trimming, sweeping, deadheading, all of it dictated by an invisible schedule. Eventually, necessity won out. The bottle of spring water beside her bed was empty, her mouth lined with the paper-dry residue of sleeping pills, and the need for motion was a pressure in her skull. She chose her clothing with care, a navy turtleneck, fitted black trousers, minimal makeup, then navigated the labyrinthine corridors until she reached the grand staircase. A pair of house staff materialized at the base, alert to her descent. Margaret herself stood nearby, orchestrating the restocking of the foyer's massive floral arrangement. She looked up as Serena reached the landing, her hands gloved in latex, fingers speckled with pollen.
"Good afternoon, Miss Hartfield,"
Margaret intoned. The greeting was neutral, but her gaze lingered on the line of Serena's brow, checking for signs of distress. Serena managed a smile.
"It's Lana.
She corrected gently.
Is Mr. Owens around?"
"Mr. Owens is on a conference call, but he'll be available later."
Margaret replied. She stripped the gloves and tossed them in a plastic-lined bin, then wiped her hands on a linen cloth.
"Will you be needing lunch, miss?"
"I'm fine for now."
The lie tasted familiar, easy.
"I thought I'd explore a bit. The house is impressive."
"Most guests start with the library.
Margaret said, allowing the faintest curve of her lips.
It's through the south corridor, just past the billiards room. If you'd like tea, ring the bell."
Serena thanked her and moved off, the soles of her boots muting against the deep pile of the hallway carpet. The mansion revealed itself in increments, a sunlit alcove displaying ancient weaponry, a sitting room papered in chinoiserie, its lamps glowing like captive fireflies, a narrow passage lined floor to ceiling with antique clocks, each ticking out of sync with the others. She paused at an arched doorway, the wood so dark and lacquered it sucked in the ambient light. The doorknob was cold, and it resisted as if considering her worthiness before yielding. The hinges did not creak. Inside, the library was both exactly what she expected and something much stranger. It was a cathedral of mahogany and gold, shelves 3 stories high, ladders wheeled into their rungs, a balcony running the perimeter like the gallery of a private theatre. Every surface was book, or brass, or leather. The air was scented with dust and faint citrus polish, an old-world cologne. At the center, beneath a stained glass skylight, a circle of velvet armchairs beckoned like a coven. She crossed to a window seat beneath the southern wall. Light fell through the glass in fractured rainbows, striping the navy of her turtleneck with unlikely color. She ran her hand along the spines, finding the books arranged with obsessive precision. Poetry, then philosophy, then an unbroken regiment of Victorian novels. Her fingers traced the alphabet until, at the bottom of a lower shelf, they snagged on the glossy edge of a magazine. Vogue, British edition. The date, last month. Not a collector's item, not a relic, but something living. She crouched, revealing more. A stack of fashion Bibles, some in Italian or French, others battered at the corners as if they'd been read and reread. Buried beneath them, a clutch of tabloids with torn covers and marker lines through offending headlines. The sight quickened her pulse in a way she couldn't explain. She gathered the nearest handful and settled cross-legged on the carpet, opening the first at random. The pages burst with impossible bodies, women sleek as panthers, eyes hollowed out by coal and attitude, limbs arranged in angles, that seemed designed to defy comfort or gravity. The gowns were armature and armor. The men in the spreads looked sculpted, airbrushed into submission. Serena paged through in silence, a hot prickle building at the base of her neck. With each photograph, a sensation surfaced. Something not quite memory, but more than longing. The heft of a satin-lined coat over bare skin. The ozone tang of hairspray in backstage air. The sound of heels tapping along a runway. The collective inhale of a crowd just before applause. She ran her hand over an image of a model in a mirrored dress, and for an instant she felt the mirrored shards dig into her thigh, each facet catching the white light. She pressed her thumb hard into the crease of the page, half expecting blood. It was only when she turned to the back cover that she realized she wasn't alone. Chad Owens stood at the periphery of the room, a blue light haloing his head from the phone held to his ear. He wore a tailored suit the color of smoke and moved with the unhurried gravity of a man for whom time bent obligingly. He must have entered minutes ago, but the carpet, dense and forgiving, had erased his approach. He watched her without speaking, eyes reflecting the glass ceiling above. He finished his call with a tight,
"Yes, good.
then set the phone on a nearby shelf.
I didn't mean to startle you.
He said, voice low.
You looked so engrossed."
Serena closed the magazine, fingers tight on the spine.
I lost track of time.
That's the point of libraries, isn't it?
He stepped closer, hands in his pockets. His smile was gentle, but the way he looked at her was anything but idle. He reached down, brushed a stray curl from her face, then took the magazine from her hands with the delicacy of a man removing a blade from a wound. He turned it over, flicked through the pages, stopped at a runway photo of a woman in black tulle and pearls. He glanced from the image to Serena's face, then back again, as if comparing notes.
You always did love these.
He said, setting the magazine aside.
Before your accident, you couldn't go a day without them. I used to joke it was your real vice, not the coffee.
Serena searched his expression for a trace of mockery, found only the careful modulation of a diplomat. She touched her temple, where the scar pulsed just beneath the skin.
Was I in any of them?
The question came out softer than she intended, tinged with something like shame. He knelt beside her, lowering himself to her level.
Not anymore,
he said, as if she'd asked about a childhood pet.
But you were, before everything changed.
He gestured with one hand, a sweeping movement that took in both the room and her body.
You were the darling of the London shows. Hartfield, the golden girl.
His eyes drifted to the bandage on her brow, then away.
That's why the press wouldn't let go. You fell so far, so fast.
The words dropped between them like pearls from a broken string. She remembered flashes, the burning sting of flashes, the heat of cameras. But also, no, that part slipped away. She licked her lips, throat dry.
Why don't I remember any of it?
Chad exhaled, the corners of his mouth turning down.
Trauma is a funny thing. Sometimes it spares us the worst.
He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers.
Maybe it's a blessing.
The gentleness in his grip felt real, but it sat uneasily atop something else, an insistence, a possessiveness she had seen only in animals guarding food or offspring. She studied his palm against hers. The fit was perfect, but she had the sense of having practiced this gesture hundreds of times in some other life. He smiled again, this time letting it reach his eyes.
You don't have to try so hard,
he said, voice dipped in honey.
You're safe now. Whatever happened before, let's leave it there.
She nodded because the alternative was argument, and the muscles of her face and throat had not yet relearned how to fight. He stood, pulling her up with him.
Come, let me show you the view from the upper balcony.
His tone brooked no refusal. They ascended the ironwork spiral staircase together, her footsteps echoing off the books and walls. At the top, a pair of French doors opened onto a narrow ledge, flanked by marble griffins. The garden rolled away below them, the pattern of hedges sharp and controlled. Above, the sky was the precise blue of a Pantone chip, edged with the threat of storm. Chad placed his hands on her shoulders, massaging them lightly as if kneading out old knots.
You don't have to prove anything here,
He said.
you only have to be.
She leaned against the balustrade, letting the wind toy with her hair, and tried to imagine herself as one of the models in the magazine. Beautiful, untouchable, silent as a photograph. But inside, the memory of fabric brushing her skin, the brightness of lights, and the pressure of unseen eyes refused to fade. She turned to Chad, searching his face for a truth he would never give her, and found only the reflection of herself in his gaze. He held her there until the chill drove them back inside, then led her down the stairs with a hand at her back, his touch gentle, guiding, unyielding. In the library, the magazines were gone, as if they had never existed. Serena sat by the window, watched the sky bruise into evening, and traced the outline of her scar with a finger, as if mapping a constellation only she could see. When Margaret entered to announce tea, Serena smiled and thanked her, but kept her eyes on the garden and her mind on the runway, walking it again and again in the theatre of her mind, as if she could wear a path back to the truth. Night in the mansion collapsed sound into velvet, swallowing every footstep, every drip from the antique radiator, every twitch of tree branches at the windows. By the time Chad's car had vanished down the drive, destination Mayfair, according to Margaret, Serena stood at the top of the landing, alone but for the muted glow of sconces lining the corridor. The house was both larger and smaller in the absence of its master. Doors that had loomed shut now seemed to breathe, and distant clocks could be heard at last, their tick an illicit metronome. She lingered outside the library for several minutes, letting her eyes adjust to the dark. The threshold offered no resistance this time, and the room's dimensions seemed to warp as the ambient light shrank. The shelves pressed in closer, the armchairs more like sentinels than invitations. In the new hush, the scent of wood polish was sharper, almost antiseptic. She paced the central aisle, trying to impose logic on her intent. What was she looking for? Not a book. Something else. Evidence. A break in the pattern. She started with the most used sections. On the lower shelves, the carpet pile was worn thin, and faint scuffs marked the wood where the rolling ladders had been dragged back and forth. She slid her finger along the rails, looking for grease or smudges. Nothing out of place. The balcony, though, told a different story. The spines here were newer, the books arranged with less discipline. Gaps yawned where volumes had been pulled and not replaced. On the far left, a shelf of modern biographies had been ransacked. Multiple dust rings suggested books had vanished in 2s and 3s, not 1s. A collector's edition of British Vogue, last year's, not this, was jammed back in upside down. Serena pulled it free. The pages fell open to a center spread featuring a tall woman in gunmetal sequins, arms akimbo, mouth open in a laugh frozen at the edge of hysteria. The woman's eyes were covered with a strip of lace, and Serena felt a jolt. The pose, the angle of her chin, the tension in the neck. It all felt like muscle memory. She replaced the magazine. At the end of the balcony, a single lamp burned. Beyond it, the wall curved into shadow, and for the first time she noticed that the books did not run all the way to the end. Instead, the final section of shelving was set on a shallow track. The seam was almost invisible. She pressed a palm to the shelf. It moved a fraction of an inch, just enough to reveal a narrow passage behind. The space was no wider than her own shoulders and dark as pitch. At the end, an oak door blocked further entry. Serena stepped in, heart working overtime. The air was colder here, and the silence was a weight against her eardrums. The door was different from the rest of the mansion. Its panels were rough-hewn, the grain deep enough to catch a fingernail. A brass lock the size of a child's fist sat just above the knob, its surface engraved with an unfamiliar sigil. She tried the handle, half expecting an alarm to blare, but it didn't budge. She retraced her steps, checked the nearby shelves for a key. Nothing in the open, but on the next shelf up, a small wooden box was tucked behind a row of legal commentaries. She shook it. No rattle. She pried it open. Inside, a jumble of dried lavender sachets, an ivory letter opener, and a bundle of old tarnished hairpins. She rolled one of the pins between her thumb and forefinger. It bent easily, the tip worn smooth from years of use. Serena knelt in front of the lock. She had no memory of ever picking one, but her hands moved as if they'd learned it in another life. She worked the pin into the slot, her other hand cupping the knob for leverage. Each click of the tumblers sent a jolt up her spine. The third click was the loudest, a shivering final note, and she felt the mechanism give. Before she could try the handle again, footsteps sounded on the balcony above. Serena froze, pressed herself into the recess of the shelving, and held her breath. Margaret appeared, her silhouette backlit by the weak lamp. She carried a stack of linens against her chest, but her posture was not that of a woman attending to chores. It was that of a sentry or a spy. She set the bundle down, then peered into the gloom. Her eyes found Serena's almost instantly.
Oh,
Margaret said, her voice pitching low to avoid echo.
I didn't expect anyone up here at this hour.
Serena stood, brushing dust from her knees.
I couldn't sleep.
Margaret nodded, but her gaze shifted to the door behind Serena.
Some nights are like that.
She said, tone clipped.
Best thing is a cup of chamomile and a warm bed.
Serena pretended not to notice the glance.
Does this door go anywhere?
She asked, tilting her head toward it. Margaret tensed, her hands tightening on the sheets.
Just old storage. Financial records, if I recall. Mr. Owens keeps everything, even from before he bought the estate. Not worth the bother, really.
Locked, though.
Serena said.
House policy. We keep all the records secure.
Margaret moved closer, her footsteps soundless on the thick rug.
Mr. Owens is particular about privacy.
Serena met her eyes, searching for a crack in the surface.
Is there a key?
Only in the main office.
Margaret replied too quickly. Serena considered her next move, but Margaret leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper.
Miss Hartfield,
She said,
some doors are locked for a reason. Please, for your own good.
it was the first time the older woman had used the name with anything approaching warmth or warning. Serena nodded, but inside the warning only sharpened her curiosity. Margaret began fussing with the linens, stacking them on the banister, then started to arrange books on the nearby shelf, straightening those already aligned. Her hands shook a little as she worked. Serena recognized the gesture as a nervous tic, a need to busy the body when the mind was elsewhere.
Do you ever read these?
Serena asked, gesturing to the rows of classics. Margaret's lips thinned.
No time, really. My daughter, she reads. The newer stuff, though, not the old stories.
Serena moved to the edge of the balcony, looking down into the main library.
Does Mr. Owens spend a lot of time here?
Margaret hesitated, then shook her head.
He prefers his office. The library is mostly for guests. And for impressions.
She forced a smile, but it withered quickly. They stood in silence, the two of them separated by less than a meter and by centuries of custom. Margaret broke it first.
If you need anything, you ring the bell. I'll bring up tea. But don't stay up here too long, miss.
She gave a meaningful glance to the locked door, then gathered her linens and disappeared into the darkness, her footsteps fading to nothing. Serena waited, listening for the telltale creak of the stair. When she was sure she was alone, she tried the lock one last time, just to feel the looseness in the mechanism. Whatever was behind the door was not perfectly secure, not anymore. She slid the hairpin back into her pocket, then returned to the main library. The lamplight there was a comfort, and she settled into the window seat, arms wrapped around her knees. She stared at the black pane of glass, watched the storm gather on the horizon, and wondered what Margaret had seen behind the door that scared her so much. She drifted off eventually, head against the velvet cushion, and dreamed of cameras flashing and crowds roaring, and behind it all, the low, inhuman sound of something locked away for far too long.
Dancing shadows where we pass, every step so whispered.